So I really appreciated the speakers this morning. I really appreciate that they did such a great job building up to our conversation. We've decided to take a little bit of a different approach. We wanted you to feel like you're a part of our conversation. And so a lot of learning, as we've been talking, happens after the seeds have been planted. So you've heard some great conversations, some great lectures this morning, and then what happens for us, and we've tried to replicate it a little bit, is we'll often connect over a cup of coffee or maybe a beer or a glass of wine. And then we discuss these topics that we've been talking about this morning, and it really begins to grow, and it's really rich. So we wanted to create that for you, and we're going to have a little bit more of what may seem like a more casual presentation or more of a conversational presentation with you today. So I'm Natalie. I'm an eco-psychologist, and that's a big word, really just for what's been happening here this morning and talking about the relationship between humans and nature. And it's kind of funny that we even look at it that way because we are nature. But we're getting back to that more and talking more and more about the people in the equation. And I think Kelly said that as we were preparing, that sometimes we take the people out of this equation. And so that little orange sheet of paper that has a beaver on it, I loved seeing that because beaver are a keystone species, and then they've been taken out in so many places, and we're seeing the results of that. And I really appreciated the previous speakers because they were talking about the people aspect, and somehow the people have gotten left out of the equation in all of this, and we're seeing the results of that. So we're going to be talking about relationships, and we wanted to share with you some of the joys and the challenges of working in relationship on our operations. We're going to talk a little bit about those as we introduce ourselves. On our ranch, we're actually, rather than a family-managed ranch, we're a ranch that's managed by two and three now couples. And so we have those challenges of working with our spouses, and sometimes we don't agree on things. And so then we have to not go home because we're already home, but then we're dealing with that relationship as a business partner and as a spouse, and then there's many layers. So I'm Natalie. I'm from Badger Creek Ranch. We're in central Colorado. We produce grass-fed, grass-finished beef, pastured poultry, and pork, and we really have a focus on education and feeding our community. And then I'm going to let Will and Kelly each introduce themselves and say a little bit about their operation and the relationships that they are working with on their operation. And specifically right now we're talking about the human relationships.
Thanks, Natalie. Hello, good morning. I'm Will Johnson. I also come from Colorado. I'm a fifth-generation rancher, cow-calf predominantly in eastern Colorado and the Colorado-Kansas border. You know, I'm a husband and a father and a son and a brother and a brother-in-law, and the opposite side of all those labels are also my business partners. So yeah, it is a very family-oriented deal. 90% of our employment is relation, and so yeah, in this topic of human and relationships, you know, ours is very familial, and from that there's huge positives and there's huge cautionary difficulties. We successfully completed our 3-year transition from the 4th generation to the 5th generation here 2 years ago, and from that we have a new corporate structure and probably a new professional approach to how we conduct business in hopes to preserve those very important family relationships. So yes, we'll get into it more as we go on, I guess.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. It feels a little strange sitting up here on the stage, but see lots of familiar faces. Also come from a family ranching operation. We are mixed between cow-calf and in Canada call them yearlings, not stockers, but same thing, as well as a mix between some of our own cattle as well as custom cattle. So our process of transitioning happened over a number of years when the operation transitioned from my parents to my brother and myself. And I often tell people now, I can't believe it, but now I'm sitting on the senior side of the table because our children are coming into the operation. So I often reflect of how fortunate we were with the opportunities and latitude that we were given from our parents, and realize that that must have sometimes been very difficult. So I appreciate that. One of the stories that I've been telling over the last couple of days, I'm also a holistic management certified educator and sit on the HMI board, as well as do work with families to help them transition to the next generation. I think in agriculture, which is what I know, we're pretty good at producing things, and in some cases we can figure out the financial piece, but what we don't have a lot of experience with is the people side and trying to improve and strengthen relationships. So I'm by no means an expert, but I'm honored to be up here, and I think a piece of it is, and this was an aha for me 30-ish years ago when we came to our first conference in this hotel, was that holistic management was a decision-making approach that talked about the land and the livestock, it talked about the finances, but in the same equation, it talked about the people. And that was the big aha moment for me, and 30 years later, I'm still hanging around, so.
Thanks, Kelly and Will. So we talked about what are some of the stories, what are some of the challenges that we've faced, and both Will and Kelly have begun that conversation and alluded to some of the challenges. As we began to prepare for our conversation with you, we started to talk and we look for common ground. What are some of the things that we have in common? And some of the things that we found right away is that we're all doing some form of adaptive management, and so we're familiar with similar tools, and yet we all have different backgrounds, whether it's holistic management or adaptive management, whatever the term is, we're talking about the same things. And we were talking about how we come to conferences like this, and this is a place I love to be. I enjoy hearing what's happening, and we get so fired up and we're so excited. Sometimes we're lucky enough to come with our whole team. Sometimes we come by ourselves, and then we're excited and we go back and we have this new learning, and we take that back to our families, right, to our operations, and then we begin to share what we've learned, and we're super excited. And sometimes the people that we're sharing that with, our team, looks at us and they're excited too, and sometimes they look at us and maybe they have a little dread on their face and they think, oh God, here we go again, with change, because change for humans can be really challenging, right, really hard. So we wanted to talk a little bit, and I've posed some questions with Will and Kelly, and so the question we want to talk a little bit about now for us is what types of practices we're using, adaptive management practices that we're using on our operations, and what were the challenges that we faced when we came back from a conference or workshop. Will and Kelly both have a long history of adaptive management and holistic management, but you still go to workshops and things change. So I wanted them to share with you, or we all want to share with you, some of the challenges that we've faced. So if Will and Kelly could share with us, what are some practices that you've implemented that have been useful, have been really helpful, and yet at the same time, what were the challenges that you faced when you started something new? Maybe it was the transitional process. What were some of the challenges that you faced going into that?
Well, I kind of have maybe a unique situation in the sense that I'm probably second generation regenerative ag or holistic ag. My dad was instrumental in the late 80s and early 90s. He went to Allen Savory and all that. So I grew up and I mean, there's a spectrum, and I don't know how progressive we are or aren't, but I grew up under an operation that utilized a lot of these practices, and we go farther down that road every day, and we think there's benefit in that. Um, but it is interesting. Part of our restructure and the generational transfer, we came up with, like I said, more professional structure or bylaws or governance. And in that, I have the formal title of CEO. And on this, you go to conference, you get inspired, you see some idea, you're like, oh my gosh, that's going to be everything. And I'm a kind of a hard charger. I was in the Marine Corps. I like my way about without compromise. But kind of moving into leadership role, you realize that you know getting effective change or having success is not a one dimensional deal. It has to take input, and you have to get buy-in and stuff like that. So I think my young evolution as a CEO is realizing that leadership is a lot more of listening, and making changes is a lot more of figuring out what the team wants, not what you want, and how to get them to follow in. And it's funny, as you get older and reflect upon your childhood and your parents, you kind of see why your parents, i.e. my boss, my dad, was doing. And it all comes back to people. So you hear these amazing grazing practices, you hear this, and I mean, this is the silver bullet, this is going to do everything. I think in the real world, or maybe not that critique, but in operations, we've experienced that the people are the number one thing in holism. In any of this, how you want to graze, what genetics you want to use, how you want to market, all that's neat, but it all comes down to the people, because those are the people that are executing whatever you're trying to accomplish. And it's, I don't know, humbling's the right word, but it is interesting to start shifting that paradigm of mine, or that perspective of mine, and understanding that the idea is probably second to getting your team, understanding what they want, hashing out what the team wants, and you have to have that buy-in to implement anything, from as simple as what mineral you're buying to where spouses are living and all that. It all comes down into those relationships.
Thank you. Yes, we mostly came into this through the grazing side of the grazing and cattle side of things, which many of you will relate to. Zoomed home, and again was fortunate because my parents were very open to the idea as well, and built a lot of fence, and did a pretty good job on some of it, not so good on others. But I think one of the things was that our core family was all pretty on board, but we also had a team of employees that were sort of thrust into this, and some of them came along and some of them didn't. And we did try to really set the stage, and brought in facilitator to help move us along. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. And I think when I reflect now, one of my important learnings has been, and this logically, but to really get the idea that everybody has a different perspective, and the people at the table don't look at through the same lens as I do, and really appreciating that, which does take some time and work, and setting up meetings and improving communication. But another piece of it that was key, and we took a fairly long time to do this, was as a family kind of started at the, well, it wasn't at the beginning because we'd already built fences, but anyway, back to the goal setting piece and the values-based goal. So sitting around and talking about what really was important to us as a family. And from a production point of view, we really changed direction. And at the time it seems like it was kind of simple, but we were intentional about getting together fairly regularly and making it be known that this was a meeting that we were having. It wasn't just Sunday night supper, visit, and talk about Christmas, and trying to do it in a bit more of a formal way with an agenda. And I mean, it wasn't real structured or rigid by any means, but just trying to be more intentional. Another piece of it that was really important for us was that we had a community of learners, and the term that is used up in Canada is called a management group. So people that had come together, gone through some kind of training, and then continued to meet over time, and sharing all kinds of struggles and successes. And we'd have, different events, continued learning events, where some of the educators would come and help us continue learning. And I think that was a key piece of it. Nowadays, it's in our neck of the woods anyway, seeing a bale grazing practice isn't so novel anymore, but about 15 years ago, it was very novel. So it's nice to have people that can share in that journey of making some big changes.
Thanks, Kelly and Will. Yeah, it's been really interesting, and Kelly was talking about setting goals. And I read something recently that said just because you're working hard doesn't mean that you're getting a lot done. And when we were preparing for this, and Kelly and I were back and forth a bit, and noticed that we have very similar styles, and Will shot me an email and kind of shared his style, and I was like, oh, well, Will's got a different style. And then we were really excited about that, because that's so often what our team looks like. And yesterday we were with the new agrarians, and we did a great little exercise, and it's color related, finding out who we are and how we, what our preferred method of communication or just functioning is. And realizing that we have similarities and we have differences, but this idea that of diversity. So we were talking about plant species diversity, and we talk about diversity in humans, but we talk about it in a broader sense sometimes, rather than getting down to just personalities on a team. And sometimes there's a trend, if you will, of wanting people to be just like me on my team. And like Will said, well, I like my way. And so if you're like me, hopefully you'll agree with my way. And so we sometimes want to stack the deck so that we get our way. Who doesn't want to get their way, right? But then realizing that those other insights, those other talents, those other skills are really important. And then having the ability to have meetings and have conversations, and they are sometimes really tough conversations, right? And having the courage to have a tough conversation. And we were talking again at the social last night, and one of the folks there that we had just met was saying, like, well, when we get into that part that gets really uncomfortable, her dad kind of shifts it to how are the kids. And I hope she doesn't mind me using that example, but goes there like, how are the kids? And like, oh, we've hit that threshold of discomfort when we start to say, well, let's just change the subject. Or, oh gosh, so how's the weather at your place? Well, those kinds of things. Or who won the football game? But we deflect, because sometimes these conversations, the proverbial gorilla or elephant in the room, are the things that we don't like to talk about so much. So we're going to actually go there a little bit as a group and say, I'm going to ask Will and Kelly either if they're willing to share like an example of, I know that when you do that generational transition, right, there can be some really tough conversations there. And so that's a really key topic right now, is this transition to the next generation and how we navigate that. There's some tough topics involved in those conversations, but if each of you has maybe a short story or an incident about, and it doesn't have to be around that topic, but if you have something that you would be willing to share, a story of a time when maybe that was kind of, you had to have a tough conversation, or maybe you had to hear something that was kind of tough to hear, and how you navigated that, as we try to share some tools and just say, yeah, we don't have it all figured out either, right? We're all learning as we go. So we don't have to go in order, but Will, if you have something you're willing to share.
I'll think for a second. You mind jumping on?
Sure. It was a tough spot, and tough conversations happened. So I've already given you a little bit of background. So as we were working through this and doing the best that we could, because I believe that's where everybody's at, and it isn't perfect. And if nothing else, I've learned this is a process, and hopefully we're always continuing to grow and develop. But as we were moving through this process, my dad passed away suddenly. And we were very, very fortunate that from a management leadership point of view, he had shared so much of the decision making. My brother and I were very involved in all the business side of things with bankers and accountants. But you just don't realize that, and many of you will have been through this, that we were lucky to have that opportunity, even if it wasn't perfect. The estate plan wasn't perfect, but we were far enough along that we were able to keep kind of plodding away. And it does totally feel like plodding. Some days it felt like drowning. So I think that that is kind of a strange gift, that we had at least had some of the conversations. And like I say, by no means perfection, you know, dealing with a sibling that wasn't actively involved in the operation creates all kinds of different dynamics, as you know. But so, I mean, I guess that was one piece that I'm forever grateful that we had some of these conversations about really what was very important to us about being in that operation.
Yeah, I think my original hesitation to answer was, yeah, every day we have those challenging conversations, and you know, I think and that's not a cynical statement. I just think, you know, life is always a challenge. You never have success. You've never have victory in the attainable sense. It's always a pursuit of, and yeah, going through this transition, which on paper has been executed. You know, I bought in. Some of my siblings had a lesser stake. I mean, it's executed. However, you know, every single day we're still managing those relationships, and this ship falls apart very quickly when those fractures start being visible. So yeah, it's a constant thing, and yeah, I mean, I guess, how do we have those? We're all adults about it. I mean, it's uncomfortable, and I mean, I'm not perfect at it. I avoid a lot, but I mean, that's a reality of life. You have to address those difficult situations, or those conversations, those topics, those situations, and you constantly have to do it. You know, I think maybe my advice is never expect them to be over, because yeah, day in, and I mean, I don't have to tell you guys that. We're all, I mean, life is always challenging us repeatedly throughout the day. Every single day you fix one thing and something else comes out. So you know, I think we have tried to formalize some of our decision-making processes. I'm a poor communicator. We have, you know, a religious, regimented meeting schedule, and weekly and monthly in different divisions. You know, we put them on the books, and that's what we do. And you know, we're forcing ourselves to address these things instead of avoiding them. And we avoid a lot. I mean, our operation is not perfect by any means, as you guys would all see if you ever came. I mean, we have struggles, but I mean, yeah, you have to just admit it and begin to address it and keep battling, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, guys. One of the things that I'm hearing from Kelly is that creation of a goal and having things in place, and then Will sharing similar processes. And sometimes we think, well, I became a farmer or a rancher because I don't want to have meetings. I don't want to sit behind the desk and create processes. Heaven help me, I do not want to do the bookkeeping, and I'm eternally grateful that one of the members on our team is very detailed, numbers oriented. That's not me. But I think as I was preparing for this conversation, I was listening to some different talks and reading some different things, and a consistent theme was the fact that we will fail and fail and fail and fail, and then we'll succeed, and then we'll fail and fail and fail and succeed. And having the mental fortitude, if you want to say that, you know, the grit, which you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't have a certain amount of grit doing what you're doing. And so having the grit to, you know, keep your head down. And sometimes for me, the grit can be the grit to have those meetings, to have those conversations, to do the work. And so we kind of laugh, like when things get a little tough, sometimes the conversation doesn't shift, but by God, there's that piece of fence way out in the back 40 that has to be fixed now. So, you know, it's another avoidance, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go fix fence. And so we find ways to avoid doing these pieces that are really essential to the success of our operation. And so one of my favorite quotes from one of the first holistic management courses I went to was about having a holistic goal, because we're going to fall. But at least if we fall forward, and we're 5 feet, most of us. We're at least 5 feet closer to our goal, even if we fall. And I loved that, and I've kept that with me. So those conversations about having a holistic goal, having the tools, but then it comes back to this whole idea of working together and working to their skills and understanding the skills on that. So, I have another question here, and we may have already addressed it, and if we had, or if you have anything else you'd like to add, but how do we motivate ourselves and how do we motivate others in our team or in our group? How do we motivate change? And I know for me sometimes, some of us like change, and it's a spectrum, right? So some of us love change, some of us hate change, and then there's everything in between. And then as we talk to others that are out there, that's been the big question. Someone talked about, before, like there's this difference between the fence lines. Why is that difference there? What if that difference started to go away? But how do we motivate the change? So that's a question I have again for my fellow panelists. How do you motivate change for yourself or others in your group?
Yeah, as Kelly said, I think, you have to identify that company or ranch ultimate goal, and that's very difficult. But within that, then, a change comes up upon grazing or location of your operation or enterprise stacking or something like that. And unless you have that clear or at least identified direction the group wants to go, I think oftentimes you focus on small changes. Hey, I found this little thing, and yes, it'll be perfect for whatever, and I'm going to bring it back. And you view it not in the greater scope, but in this individual scope that, the proof is this thing does work. Well, that's one-dimensional, and we all know, in this complex, interrelated world we live in, that, those days are gone. And I mean, they never existed, but we have now the knowledge that, yeah, you can't individualize life. It is all holistic, and if you have that company goal, the family goal, the operation, big, broad idea of what it is, and relate any possible changes to that, I think that gives us a lot of directive of, well, I think this is smart, but the group's fighting me. Why is the group fighting me? Well, it must be because I'm not seeing how it is relating to our overall direction as other people are. And then you go through your prioritization. Well, yeah, our overall goal is the most important thing, and I'm getting pushback from this. Where's that misconnect? And I need to remember that our big goal is what's going on, not these small things, not my pounds per acre, which I think are extraordinarily perfect, but that affects when my sister-in-law gets to take her kid to daycare. So there are all these interconnectivity, and yeah, I think for a sustainable, successful operation or a sustainable, successful family, you have to always zoom back, go back to the basics, see how it affects the whole, and not get sucked into the sites and see just minute changes and minute benefits, even though financially they could be big. You're balancing all that, and it is all related.
My brain's going a million miles an hour, and I'm having all kinds of bounce around responses to that. But one that's resonating right now, and many of you in the room will have heard of Simon Sinek and the Golden Circle. And when I saw his video on talking about at the center of the circle is the why, and beyond that is the what, and then the outer ring is the how, it just really resonated with me that in the circles that we're talking about, really getting to the core of why we do what we do. And I think that just is totally what Will was saying made me think even more about that, because then some of the challenges we come into in our operations and our teams are about the tools or the how-to. But when we can kind of step back and look at that, well, why are we really doing this? And what are the values that we're placing on? I think that's very helpful. On a more individual or approach, I think helping to motivate, one of the things that motivate change is authenticity, so that hopefully that we can be real in saying, we've made great progress and we've had a lot of successes, but we've also had some failures too, so we can't pretend for a second that this is all going to be sunshine and roses.
I really appreciate what both Kelly and Will are saying, that, it's, we can get these, the pounds per acre is perfect, right? And we're excited about that, but we can do all these different things perfectly, but I think one of the biggest threats to any of our success on our operations is really our relationships. And if those relationships fall apart, the whole thing can fall apart in a hurry, as Will was saying, the whole ship can just, come apart. And so the relationships are so important, and sometimes the part that we don't talk about, or the part that we don't tend. We're out there, tending the land, tending the soil, tending our cattle or our sheep, whatever our livestock are, whatever we're growing, but we sometimes forget to tend the relationships, and that's such an important part of what we're doing. So when we talked about what do we call this panel, and we really believed that we wanted to focus on relationships and the importance of relationships and how that plays into, you can be the best holistic manager, you can have the most tools in your toolkit, but it's the interaction, the interrelationship of of how we relate is what's going to create our success or not. And as Kelly was saying, one of my favorite things, and I think this community is so important, the community, your local community, and then that ring that goes out, and the larger community, and this community, and we're really a global community. And I know in my community, we have a very dear friend and mentor, and when we talk to him, and he seems like he has it all figured out, but he's very humble, and he said to us right away, look, I've been doing this most of my life, and I'm still learning, I'm still adapting, I'm still changing. And to see somebody who's been practicing this for so long, and in my mind is so successful, say that, don't feel like you're doing it wrong. Just keep trying and think about what works versus what doesn't work, and know that you'll keep changing all of those things. And so we're going to do a deeper dive into conversations about relationships and tools that we use, tools that we've learned, and we'd love to share with you guys. We have a roundtable tomorrow afternoon, and we invite you to join us and come out. We have just a few minutes left before, and then we will have a chance for questions, but I just wanted to ask Will and Kelly both, if there was one little nugget that you could leave the audience with in this moment, and then of course invite them to come talk with us deeper at the roundtable, do you have one quick piece of wisdom you would impart?
Yeah, I mean, it probably doesn't come as a surprise seeing the name of this talk, and I think my dad was instrumental in it. There are, and this is a negative word, but there are gimmicks and, production models that come and go, and yeah, I think they're drifting in the correct direction, but it all comes back, in I think my dad's opinion, and I'm seeing the value of it, to the human element in any of operation. To have any meaningful impact on your financial setting, your community you reside in, the environment you live on, you have to have that human element that sustains duration, time, real time, and flashes in the pan, or doing something amazing for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. The world's been here a long time, and the communities have been here a long time. You have to focus and prioritize the human element of your operation to make any impact on any subsequent goal that you have, because I'm defining impact as a change that has stability to it or longevity to it, and that there's a time element in that. And for any of us to make an impact, we have to be there for a long time, and you can only do that if you manage family relationship within your business partners, I guess is where I'd come down on.
That was so excellent, Will. I think that one of the things that I often share is that it's without a doubt some of the hardest work you'll ever do, but it's also without a doubt some of the most rewarding. And so I just encourage people just to take some of those steps, because as in all other things, one step leads to another, and some of those conversations that might be difficult to have, one day will start to come a little easier, and we're totally running out of time, I think.
We did really well. Kelly and I both had this fear that we would just ramble on, and so hopefully we haven't done that. And we would love to just, if there's anyone in the audience who has a quick question or two, we'd be more than happy to share.